Hello! Have you ever wondered how a top-down Raglan jumper actually works? You cast on at the neckline, you keep increasing, you split the body and sleeves, and then you have a jumper. And even though you might have followed the pattern to the letter, the jumper still doesn't fit properly sometimes. And this is because there is actually quite a lot of maths happening along the way. And as someone who works with data for a living, I have to admit that I find that part of knitting weirdly satisfying. So today I'm gonna try to break down some of the maths behind a top-down raglan jumper without making it feel like a maths lesson. The first thing we need is our gauge. Everyone knits differently. Some people knit tighter, some people knit looser, and that's why we actually make 10 by 10 centimeter gauge shots. So let's say that my gauge is 20 stitches over 10 centimeters. And this means that for every 1 centimeter, I've got 2 stitches. And this is really important because it allows us to translate measurements in centimeters into stitches. So for example, if I want the finished body of my jumper to be 100 centimeters, then I need about 200 stitches. And just like that, we've gone from a measurement in centimeters to a number of stitches. And this is basically the foundation of everything that follows. But we don't usually want our jumper to be exactly the same size as our body. And that's where ease comes in. Let's say that my actual body measurement is 90 centimeters, but I want 10 centimeters of positive ease. Likewise, we can have negative ease. But let's just use as an example a positive ease of 10 centimeters. So then my finished garment measurement would therefore be 100 centimeters. And now we can go back to our gauge. So we need 2 stitches for every 1 centimeter, which means that to get to 100 centimeters, we need 200 stitches. So the maths is actually quite simple. So we just add up body measurement plus desired ease, and that gives us the finished garment measurement. And then we multiply the finished garment measurements by the number of stitches per centimeters, and that gives us the required stitches. And this is where things get more interesting. So a raglan jumper is essentially divided into 4 sections: the front, the back, and the 2 sleeves. And between these sections, we have 4 raglan lines. These raglan lines are where we make our increases. So for example, if we are adding 1 stitch on each side of each raglan line, that gives us 4 raglan lines times 2 stitches, that gives us 8 new stitches. So every increase round gives us another 8 stitches. And then we repeat this, and repeat this, and repeat it, which is how a tiny neckline gradually becomes the upper part of a jumper. Those new stitches aren't just being added randomly. They are increasing the width of the front, the back, and the sleeves at the same time. For example, imagine that after several increase rounds, we have something like 90 stitches for the front, 90 stitches for the back, 55 stitches for one sleeve, and 55 stitches for the other sleeve. And that gives us a total of 290 stitches. The exact numbers will obviously depend on the size of the jumper, your gauge, and the proportions you're aiming for. But the important thing is that the jumper is being built through a series of controlled increases. So it's basically a mathematical system. Eventually, we reach the point where the yoke is deep enough. And this is where something quite satisfying happens. We stop increasing the sleeves and separate them from the body. The sleeve stitches are put on hold and the front and back are joined together. And suddenly, we have a body! At this point, we're no longer increasing the width in the same way. We're mostly knitting downwards until we reach the length we want. Then we can come back to those stitches we put on hold and knit the sleeves. So the whole jumper has essentially been created from one continuous sequence of measurements and increases. Because all of this depends on gauge. If my pattern assumes 20 stitches per 10 centimeters and I actually get 18 stitches per 10 centimeters, I'm going to end up with a different sized jumper. And this is why you can follow exactly the same number of increases as somebody else and still end up with a completely different garment. The maths isn't wrong, the input is different. And that's actually something I come across in my day job all the time. If you change the assumptions going into a calculation, you change the result. Knitting is apparently no different. Because once you understand the maths behind the top-down raglan, you realize that you don't necessarily need to rely completely on a pattern. You can start understanding how the numbers work. You can change your gauge. You can change the amount of ease. You can adjust the length. You can change the proportions. And you can start designing a jumper that actually fits the person you're making it for. And that's exactly why I started working on my Raglan calculator. I wanted to take all these measurements and calculations and make them easier to use because I love knitting, but I also apparently can't stop myself from turning knitting into a spreadsheet. And honestly, I'm completely fine with that. If you'd like to see how the calculator works, just check the description below. I've attached the link to it. And if you enjoyed this slightly nerdy look at the maths behind knitting, make sure you subscribe to the thread within. I'll see you in the next one.